Jordan Banks, 27, a genius mind with 6 patents, codes until midnight in the quiet office of Zephyrstone Technologies. But when the new CTO, Margaret Walsh, and her ambitious daughter Sienna arrive, they see him only as an ordinary technician, easily dismissed. They don't realize their arrogance will awaken a storm, ready to sweep away their ambitions. The glow of monitors hummed against the silence of an almost empty floor at Zephyrstone Technologies. It was past midnight, and the rain outside tapped relentlessly against the glass walls, streaking the Seattle skyline into blurred rivers of neon. Jordan Banks sat hunched over his desk, hoodie drawn tight, eyes fixed on cascading lines of code. His coffee was long cold, but the problem on his screen was alive, a flaw in the authentication module that, if left unchecked, could expose client data across thousands of accounts. He typed with a rhythm only desperation and mastery could produce. Every keystroke carved order out of chaos. For him, this was not a job, it was proof. Proof that he belonged, that his 6 pending patents weren't accidents, that the startup he helped build from the ground up still had a soul worth protecting. And then, heels clicked on the polished floor behind him. Jordan froze. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Sienna Walsh. 24, Stanford MBA. Glossy confidence polished by privilege. She carried herself like a protagonist in her own story, heels sharp enough to slice silence in half. "Still here," she said, leaning against the edge of his cubicle wall. Her tone carried mockery, not curiosity. Jordan inhaled slowly, trying to keep his eyes on the code. "Yeah. Security patch. Needs to be deployed before morning. If this bug spreads." She cut him off with a laugh, tossing her hair back. "God, Jordan. You make it sound like the world ends if you don't fix. What is it you do again?" "Oh right, fantasy football for nerds." The jab landed harder than he wanted to admit. His jaw clenched, but his voice stayed even. "It's authentication, Sienna. Without it, no one logs in. Not even you." Her smirk widened, unfazed. "Relax. I'm just saying, maybe if you didn't work like some obsessed gamer, you wouldn't look so desperate." She tapped her phone screen, already bored, and walked away, heels echoing like a taunt. Jordan's hands hovered over the keyboard, shaking slightly. He replayed her words, each one a needle stitching humiliation into his chest. Desperate. He thought of the years he'd poured into Zephyrstone, late nights, skipped holidays, patents drafted in coffee-stained notebooks. And yet here he was, dismissed as a boy playing games, while someone with zero technical understanding stood on a ladder built by her last name. His gaze drifted toward the CTO's office at the far end of the hall. Margaret Walsh, Sienna's mother, had taken over just months ago. A seasoned corporate veteran with a reputation for streamlining companies, which, Jordan was beginning to realize, often meant gutting the people who built them. The office lights were still on. A shadow moved across the blinds. Margaret was inside, talking animatedly on the phone. Jordan couldn't hear her words, but he saw the gestures, brisk, cutting, final. Restructure, he thought. She's already rearranging the chessboard. By the time Jordan left, it was nearly 2 a.m. The rain had turned into sheets, battering the pavement as he walked to his car. His reflection swam across puddles, fractured by the storm. Driving home through downtown Seattle, he thought about David Keller, the original founder of Zephyrstone. David was the kind of man who brought pizza into late-night coding sprints, who wrote code alongside interns, who treated Jordan not as the kid, but as a peer. Those nights had been electric, fueled by the belief they were building something that mattered. But David was long gone, ousted after a board shake-up. In his place stood Margaret Walsh, polished, political, efficient. And now her daughter, entitled, dismissive, already sinking claws into the team. Jordan gripped the steering wheel tighter. He could almost feel the walls closing in. When he finally collapsed into bed, sleep did not come. Instead, memories did, flashes of his patents. The compression algorithm he built in his kitchen after a 16-hour shift. The synchronization system he'd scribbled on whiteboards during weekends while others were at parties. Each one represented a piece of him. His work, his nights, his brilliance. He still held ownership, at least legally, but how long before the paperwork changed hands? A conversation with his lawyer from months ago floated back. Don't transfer anything until you've reviewed the terms, Jordan. Your patents are your leverage. Leverage. He hadn't thought of it that way. Until now. The next morning, Zephyrstone's open office buzzed with a strange energy. Margaret Walsh had gathered managers for a briefing. Jordan wasn't invited. He lingered outside the glass wall, watching faces tighten as she spoke. Sienna sat next to her, nodding dutifully, whispering in her mother's ear. A new org chart flashed on the presentation screen. Jordan's name was absent. His role, redistributed. A senior platform specialist, would now lead the very modules he created. And then he saw it. Sienna smirking through the glass, eyes locking with his like she knew exactly how irrelevant he had just become. Jordan stepped back, pulse hammering. The humiliation from the night before mixed with something heavier, betrayal, sharper than any insult. In that moment, under the fluorescent hum of a company he had given everything to, Jordan Banks understood something with chilling clarity. He was no longer a valued engineer. He was prey. The rain hadn't let up. Seattle was drowning in it, the kind of storm that blurred streetlights into hazy orbs and turned sidewalks into rivers. For Jordan, it was fitting, almost too fitting. He sat in his car, parked on the curb outside his modest Capitol Hill apartment, hands gripping the steering wheel long after the engine had gone quiet. The windshield wipers swiped back and forth, a metronome to his spiraling thoughts. Inside the car, silence pressed in. Outside, the city pulsed with neon reflected in puddles, red taillights rippling like wounds across the asphalt. Jordan's reflection in the rearview mirror stared back at him. He looked tired, older than 27. Eyes shadowed, jaw tight. A man who had given everything to something that was no longer his. The old Zephyrstone. He thought back to his first week at Zephyrstone, 3 years ago. The company had been alive then. David Keller, the founder, had been a whirlwind of energy, always in sneakers, always with a grin, always scribbling impossible ideas on whiteboards and urging the team to make it real. There had been late-night coding sessions with pizza boxes stacked like trophies, laughter spilling louder than the servers humming in the background. Jordan had thrived in that chaos, his ideas met with curiosity, his patents drafted with pride. He remembered one particular night, David leaning over his shoulder as Jordan explained the skeleton of what would become the synchronization protocol, one of the 6 patents now in limbo. David had clapped him on the back. "You're not just writing code, Jordan. You're building arteries. Without this, the whole body collapses." Those words had burned into him, fuel for endless nights. Now, looking back, the warmth of that memory only made the present colder. The new regime. When Margaret Walsh arrived, everything changed. The laughter was replaced by hushed meetings behind glass walls. The pizza boxes disappeared, replaced by sterile catered lunches for productivity. And then came Sienna. Entitlement draped over her like a tailored coat. She wasn't there to learn, she was there to be seen. And Margaret, cold, deliberate, let her hover in every meeting, whispering poison about efficiency and marketability, while Jordan's name disappeared from documents. Jordan had noticed the shift. Files he once had access to, now restricted. Calendar invites that once included him, now missing. Conversations that paused when he walked by. He had convinced himself it was temporary. A mistake. A miscommunication. But after last night's insult, after this morning's revelation, he knew better. They weren't just sidelining him. They were erasing him. The weight of patents. Jordan's eyes drifted toward the glove compartment. Inside, tucked neatly in a folder, were copies of his patent filings. 6 inventions that had transformed Zephyrstone's architecture. A compression algorithm that halved data costs. A synchronization system that kept users connected in real time. An authentication module that hardened entry points like steel. 3 others, each equally vital. He remembered drafting the first one at his kitchen table, greasy takeout containers pushed aside, his laptop balanced on a stack of textbooks. He remembered the elation when the filing confirmation arrived. Each patent was a fragment of him. His time. His genius. His sacrifice. And now Margaret and Sienna wanted to strip it away with a smile, arguing that company resources made it theirs. His stomach churned. He knew the truth. Without those patents, Zephyrstone was a hollow shell. Their billion-dollar valuation was built on his framework. Without him, they were exposed. The lawyer's warning. A voice replayed in his head. Thomas Garrett, the lawyer he'd consulted months ago, when the company first mentioned transferring intellectual property rights. Jordan, until you sign those transfers, those patents are yours. Be careful. Don't rush. They're your leverage. At the time, Jordan had nodded politely, filing the advice away. He hadn't believed it would come to this. He'd thought merit mattered. That a company built on innovation wouldn't eat its own innovators. Now, in the rain, that word took on new gravity. Leverage. The shift within. A bus roared past, spraying water across the sidewalk, snapping him from his thoughts. He realized he had been sitting in the car for nearly an hour, unmoving. He finally stepped out, the rain soaking him instantly, seeping through his hoodie, chilling him to the bone. He didn't care. The cold was clarifying. Every drop that hit his skin felt like erasure, washing away the naivety, the hope that fairness still existed inside Zephyrstone. As he walked up the steps to his apartment, a clarity began to crystallize. The humiliation Sienna had spat at him. The exclusion Margaret had orchestrated. The org chart without his name. They thought he was finished. They thought he was powerless. They thought his youth made him disposable. But they had underestimated him. He still had his patents. He still had his brilliance. And now, he had something stronger than either, rage sharpened into resolve. Inside his dim apartment, Jordan tossed his soaked hoodie aside and sat at his desk, staring at the patent folder. For the first time, he saw them not just as ideas. Not just as work. He saw them as weapons. The next morning, the rain had thinned to a drizzle. Seattle wore its usual gray coat, the kind of sky that made time feel stuck. Jordan sat at his kitchen table, a mug of black coffee untouched beside him, the patent folder spread out like a crime scene. Each document bore his name in black ink, a fragile shield against the storm closing in. He traced his finger over the title of the first filing, Adaptive Compression for High-Throughput Systems. His handwriting in the margins was still there, scribbled equations, notes from nights where he'd barely slept. They weren't just inventions. They were receipts. Proof of his brilliance. Proof that he existed. But proof wasn't always protection. The conversation that changed everything. His phone buzzed. A number he hadn't dialed in months. Thomas Garrett. The calm, steady voice answered after the first ring. Jordan hesitated. His throat was dry. It's Jordan. Banks. A pause. Then recognition. Jordan. Been expecting this call. Jordan frowned. Expecting. I warned you this might happen, Garrett said. Papers rustled faintly on the other end. CTOs, boards, executives, if they smell money, they'll try to wrap their hands around it. Let me guess. They're coming for your patents. Jordan's silence was answer enough. Garrett sighed. I'll keep it simple. Legally, until you transfer ownership, those filings belong to you. Not the company. Not the CTO. You. If you never signed the intellectual property assignment, Zephyrstone's entire platform is standing on sand. Jordan's pulse quickened. They'll argue I built them with company resources. They can argue, Garrett replied coolly. But without a signed transfer agreement or licensing terms, they don't own a damn line of it. The law doesn't bend just because they want it to. If anything, you're the one holding the detonator. Jordan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The detonator. Jordan, Garrett continued, his tone sharpening. Understand this. If you choose, you can revoke their right to use your patents. Every single one. That means their product, their launch, their contracts, all of it crumbles. Overnight. The words hit like thunder. For a moment, Jordan's breath caught. He imagined it. Margaret's face when the platform failed, Sienna's smug grin wiped clean. But, Garrett added, you need to be strategic. A cease and desist order isn't just a letter, it's a declaration of war. Once you pull that trigger, there's no going back. Jordan's hands trembled, not with fear, but with the first surge of power he had felt in weeks. The scheme revealed. Later that day, Jordan returned to the office. He moved quietly, unnoticed, like a ghost slipping between the glass corridors. He had no meeting invites, no documents to review, but he had his instincts. Passing by a conference room, he caught fragments of voices. Margaret Walsh. Sienna. 2 board members. We'll finalize the restructure after launch, Margaret was saying. Jordan won't be an issue. He's too young to fight this legally, Sienna chimed in, voice dripping with smug certainty. We'll argue every filing was done on company time, with company resources. He'll fold. Jordan's chest tightened. He pressed his back against the wall, listening. Once the patents transfer, Margaret continued, we secure the valuation. Then we can consider his redundancy. A silence, followed by muted laughter. Jordan closed his eyes. The words stabbed deeper than any insult. Redundancy. To them, he was not a man. Not a mind. Not an architect of their empire. He was disposable. He walked away before they could see him, each step heavier than the last. But inside, something solidified. They thought they had already won. They thought his silence meant surrender. They didn't know he was holding the detonator. The turning point. That night, back in his apartment, Jordan spread the patents across the table once more. The rain had started again, soft against the window, steady like a drumbeat. 4 hours, he stared at them, weighing Garrett's words, replaying Margaret and Sienna's laughter in his mind. He imagined 2 paths. Do nothing. Let them take everything, swallow the humiliation, fade into obscurity. Fight. Risk everything, strike first, and burn their empire down with the truth. The choice felt less like a decision and more like inevitability. His phone lit up with a new email. A company-wide memo. Margaret's words. Exciting changes ahead. Our upcoming launch will redefine the industry. I want to thank every member of this team, especially our interns, for their hard work. Not a word about him. Not a word about the architect of it all. Jordan's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. All right, he whispered. Let's see how well your launch goes without me. He reached for his phone. Dialed Garrett's number again. I'm ready, he said when the lawyer picked up. Draft the cease and desist. The storm gathers. For the first time in weeks, Jordan felt calm. Focused. The humiliation that had weighed on him was gone, replaced by something sharper. This wasn't desperation anymore. It was war. And Margaret and Sienna Walsh had no idea that the ground beneath Zephyrstone was already cracking. The office was buzzing the next morning. Launch day loomed closer, and the building throbbed with the nervous energy of a company on the brink of validation, or collapse. Jordan wasn't at his desk. He wasn't in the lab. He wasn't even on the calendar. But his presence would be felt. The drafting. The night before, he had met Garrett in a quiet law office downtown. The lobby had been empty, the only sound the rain pattering against the tall glass windows. Garrett slid the papers across a mahogany table. The language was cold, precise, lethal. Cease and desist all usage of the following patented technologies. 6 titles, 6 filings, each carrying Jordan's name. Garrett explained each clause like a surgeon describing an incision. This makes it clear, you own the framework. This strips them of legal right to deploy, demonstrate, or sell. And this, he tapped the final page, warns that any attempt to proceed will trigger injunctions and financial penalties. Jordan read the words slowly, the weight of them sinking in. They weren't just ink. They were chains, ready to wrap around Zephyrstone's throat. Once we serve this, Garrett said, the platform dies until they come to terms. If they ignore it, they risk lawsuits that will bury them. Jordan signed his name at the bottom. His pen moved without hesitation. Send it. Delivery. At 9:07 a.m., Margaret Walsh received an email flagged urgent, legal notice. She skimmed the header, her jaw tightening. By the second paragraph, her face drained of color. Effective immediately, you are ordered to cease and desist all use, distribution, and demonstration of technologies covered under U.S. patent numbers. Her eyes darted to the signatures at the bottom. Jordan Banks. Thomas Garrett, attorney at law. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. Sienna. My office. Now. Within minutes, Sienna appeared, iced latte in hand, smirk intact. What's the drama, Mom? Margaret thrust the paper at her. The smirk faltered. You've got to be kidding me. This is a stunt, Margaret muttered. A desperate bluff. He wouldn't. But the language was airtight. Even Sienna could see it. He's really doing this, she whispered. The panic begins. By noon, word had spread through the executive floor. Legal counsel was summoned. The board dialed in. Slack channels buzzed with whispers. Jordan sat quietly at his desk, headphones in, coding as if nothing had changed. He ignored the glances, the sudden hush when he passed by. For the first time in weeks, the power imbalance had flipped. They were reacting to him. Margaret stormed into the legal department, demanding loopholes. But every counsel repeated the same thing. Without signed transfers or a licensing agreement, his patents are his. Proceeding with the launch puts us at catastrophic legal risk. Catastrophic. The word echoed down the hallways. The meeting. By 3 p.m., Margaret had no choice. She called Jordan into a closed-door meeting. Sienna was there, arms crossed, eyes like knives. Margaret's voice was low, forced calm. Jordan, we received your letter. I think you understand the seriousness of this situation. Jordan met her gaze, unflinching. I do. Perfectly. You're sabotaging your own company, Sienna snapped. Do you realize how insane this is? My company. Jordan's voice was steady, almost gentle. No, Sienna. It's your mother's company. I just built the foundation. A foundation you've been trying to rip out from under me. Margaret leaned forward. Jordan, listen. If this launch fails, we all lose. You included. Jordan tilted his head. Do I? Or do I finally stop being erased? Silence. The weight of his words hung in the air. Margaret's mask cracked for just a second. The faintest flicker of fear. The chess move. He stood, gathering his papers. You wanted me gone. Redundant, wasn't it? He glanced at Sienna. Well, now you can see how redundant your platform is without me. Sienna's cheeks flushed red. You arrogant. But Margaret cut her off. Jordan. Wait. He turned at the door. Margaret's voice trembled, the first sign of desperation. What do you want? Jordan paused, savoring the moment. I want respect. I want acknowledgement. And if I don't get it, I want you to watch everything you built burn. He left before she could respond. The door slammed shut behind him. The crack in the glass. That night, Zephyrstone's glass tower glowed against the rain, but inside, the atmosphere was fractured. Executives argued behind closed doors. Legal teams drafted frantic memos. And Jordan, walking alone beneath the streetlights, felt the strange calm of a man who had finally drawn his sword. For years, they had seen him as a boy. Now, for the first time, they would see him as a threat. The next morning, Zephyrstone's headquarters looked normal from the outside, The usual hum of cars, the same rain-streaked glass, the same commuters rushing through revolving doors. But inside, the company pulsed with tension. The cease and desist had cracked the glass. Everyone felt it. The boardroom showdown. Margaret Walsh stood at the head of a long glass table, board members on screens behind her, legal counsel scribbling notes at her side. Sienna hovered near the corner, too proud to sit, too restless to stay still. "Listen to me," Margaret said, her voice firm, almost defiant. "Jordan Banks is bluffing. He won't risk destroying his own career just to spite us." One of the board members adjusted his glasses. "Bluff or not, Margaret, his lawyer's language is bulletproof. If we move forward and he pursues injunctions, we're exposed. Liability, damages, even SEC scrutiny." "Exactly," another added. "The launch is days away. If the platform isn't legally secure, we're gambling with fire." Margaret's jaw tightened. "We've invested too much to stall. If we delay now, we hemorrhage credibility. Competitors will eat us alive." Sienna stepped forward, crossing her arms. "This is a scare tactic. He's just a coder who got lucky. If we cave, we hand him power he doesn't deserve." The room fell into uneasy silence. Finally, the chairman's voice cut through the static of the call. "Margaret, resolve this. Quietly. Either negotiate or neutralize him. But do not let this reach investors." The line went dead. The whisper network. By lunch, the office was buzzing with half-truths and rumors. Engineers whispered in hallways, interns exchanged glances near the coffee machines. "Did you hear? Jordan's patents. They can't launch without him. Legal says the whole product's on hold." Jordan heard it all as he passed through the corridors, a ghost in his own company. People avoided his eyes, unsure whether to fear him or admire him. At his desk, he worked silently, his fingers moving across the keyboard with surgical precision. Not code for them anymore. Code for him. Because while Margaret scrambled to patch over legal cracks, Jordan was preparing the final failsafe. The framework key. Every line of Zephyrstone's platform ran through a single gate, the security framework Jordan had written himself. It was elegant, invisible, and absolutely essential. No one else fully understood it. Not Margaret. Not Sienna. Not any engineer in the building. Jordan alone held the master key. He opened a private terminal window, hidden behind innocuous code. His screen lit up with strings of encryption, his encryption. In minutes, he could lock the system. Disable every authentication layer. Turn their gleaming platform into dead code. He stared at the cursor, blinking like a heartbeat. Not yet, he thought. Timing is everything. The Walsh's plot. That evening, Margaret and Sienna sat in her office, blinds drawn against the storm outside. "This ends now," Margaret said. "We'll force his hand. Offer him a settlement. Buy him out, clean, fast." Sienna's lip curled. "Why even pay him? He used our labs, our servers. We could fight this in court. Tie him up for years." "Years we don't have," Margaret snapped. "The launch is in 3 days. If he pulls the trigger now, we're finished." Sienna slammed her latte on the desk, liquid sloshing over the lid. "He's just a boy with a grudge. Treat him like one." Margaret pinched the bridge of her nose. For the first time, doubt crept in. She had underestimated him. They both had. Jordan's resolve. Back in his apartment, Jordan sat by the window, rain sliding down the glass. The city lights blurred through the droplets, neon smears against the night. His phone buzzed. An email from Margaret. "Jordan, let's talk. There's a solution here if you're willing to be reasonable." Reasonable. He almost laughed. He thought of all the nights he had stayed late, patching code while others slept. He thought of being mocked, dismissed, reduced to a boy in his own lab. Reasonable meant surrender. Reasonable meant erasure. Jordan closed the laptop. He had already made his choice. The cease and desist was only the warning shot. The real strike was coming. Foreshadow of collapse. At Zephyrstone, the countdown to launch continued. Marketing campaigns rolled out. Invitations to the demo had been sent. Journalists were already booking flights. On the surface, everything gleamed. But deep inside the system, hidden behind layers of code, Jordan's framework waited for his command. A single keystroke, and their empire would fall. The day of the launch arrived with an icy drizzle. Seattle's skyline was veiled in gray, as if the city itself knew what was about to unfold. Zephyrstone Tower gleamed against the gloom, its lobby buzzing with journalists, investors, and camera crews. Banners lined the atrium. Zephyrstone, the future of secure tech. Excitement crackled in the air. This was the day Margaret Walsh had promised would cement Zephyrstone's dominance. The stage. The main hall had been transformed into a stage of spectacle. LED screens pulsing with corporate branding, sleek demo stations polished to a mirror shine. Rows of chairs filled with industry leaders, clients, and tech reporters. Margaret stood near the stage, her power suit sharp, her smile rehearsed. Sienna hovered at her side, scanning the crowd with the smugness of someone who thought the spotlight belonged to her. "Relax," Margaret whispered. "The show goes on." But beneath her calm veneer, her pulse pounded. Jordan's cease and desist still haunted her. The legal team had insisted on caution. Margaret had overruled them. The launch was happening, at any cost. Backstage. Jordan wasn't on the guest list. He wasn't in the program. He wasn't even supposed to be in the building. But as the audience filed in, he sat quietly in the engineering pit, hood up, laptop balanced on his knees. No one stopped him. No one dared. On his screen, lines of code pulsed like veins of light. His framework sat dormant, waiting for his signal. He watched the stage through the glass partition, his reflection overlapping Margaret's as she prepared to step into the spotlight. Time to remind them whose foundation they're standing on. The presentation begins. At exactly 10 a.m., the house lights dimmed. Applause rippled as Margaret strode onto the stage, her heels clicking against polished wood. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice amplified through the hall. "Today, you will witness the future of security technology. Zephyrstone is proud to unveil." She gestured toward the massive screen behind her. "A platform that will redefine how we protect the digital world." The audience leaned forward. Cameras clicked. Investors nodded. Margaret's hand hovered dramatically over the control tablet. "Allow me to demonstrate." The trigger. From his laptop, Jordan typed a single command. The cursor blinked once. Then the framework locked. On stage, Margaret tapped the demo tablet. Nothing happened. The screen behind her froze, the Zephyrstone logo hanging awkwardly in silence. She pressed again. Still nothing. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Margaret's smile flickered, but she pressed forward. Technical hiccup. Let me just. The tablet flashed red. Authentication failure. Gasps from the audience. Journalists raised their phones. The collapse. Behind the scenes, engineers scrambled. Keyboards clattered. Panic spread like fire. Servers are rejecting logins. Encryption keys invalid. It's the framework, nothing's passing authentication. In the control booth, one of the tech leads whispered the unthinkable. "Jordan shut us out." On stage, Margaret's calm cracked. Sweat glistened at her temple as the screens around her flickered. Instead of sleek visuals, error codes spilled across the displays. Access denied. System locked. Framework disabled. Each failure message felt like a bullet, puncturing Zephyrstone's illusion of power. The audience whispered louder, restless. Investors exchanged worried glances. A CNBC reporter typed furiously into his phone. Public humiliation. Margaret gripped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, just a minor delay." but the words died as every single screen in the hall went black. The lights dimmed unintentionally, leaving the room in a hushed, eerie glow. Then, across the massive display behind her, a single line of text appeared. Unauthorized demo attempt blocked. Patent holder, Jordan Banks. The room gasped. Cameras flashed. Journalists surged forward. Investors erupted in confusion. Sienna's face went pale, her bravado disintegrating in front of hundreds of witnesses. Margaret froze, the microphone limp in her hand. Her career, her authority, her very credibility had been stripped bare in real time. The fallout in real time. Within minutes, Twitter exploded. #ZephyrStoneFail. #JordanBanks. #PatentGate. Livestream viewers watched as chaos unfolded. Journalists streamed live commentary. Zephyrstone unable to launch. Engineer claims ownership of core tech. The company's stock ticker, broadcast on one of the lobby monitors, began to nosedive. -5%. -10. -20. Major clients texted their executives. Cancel. We're out. The empire was collapsing, brick by brick, all because one man had pulled a thread they thought invisible. Jordan walks away. In the chaos, Jordan closed his laptop. He stood, pulling his hood over his head. No one noticed him slip out of the engineering pit. No one stopped him as he walked down the glass corridor, past panicked employees and frantic executives. Outside, the rain had eased. The air was sharp, clean. He stepped into the street, blending into the city as behind him, Zephyrstone burned, not with fire, but with humiliation. He didn't look back. The morning after the failed launch, Seattle woke to headlines that tore through the city like a storm. Zephyrstone launch collapses in disaster. Patent holder pulls plug. Tech prodigy exposes giant. Jordan Banks versus Zephyrstone. Stock freefalls as investors flee. Every news site, every financial network, every social feed echoed the same story. Margaret Walsh's empire had crumbled in front of the world. The boardroom execution. By noon, Margaret stood once again in the boardroom, but this time the air was different. No branding banners, no triumphant speeches. Just cold silence. The chairman's face filled the wall monitor, eyes sharp with fury. Around him, other board members sat like judges at a tribunal. "Margaret," he said flatly, "yesterday was the most humiliating event in Zephyrstone's history." Margaret straightened her blazer, forcing steel into her voice. "We suffered a coordinated sabotage. Jordan Banks deliberately attacked us." The chairman cut her off. "Jordan Banks owns the framework. Legally. We ignored his cease and desist, and he enforced his rights. That's not sabotage. That's incompetence." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the board. Margaret's throat tightened. "We can recover." "You won't," the chairman snapped. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as CTO. Security will escort you from the building." Margaret's face drained of color. She looked around the room, searching for an ally. None met her eyes. When she finally turned toward the door, Sienna was waiting outside, wide-eyed. "They can't do this to you," Sienna whispered. "They just did," Margaret said, her voice hollow. Sienna's fall. Hours later, Sienna was summoned to HR. She walked in with her chin high, rehearsing her indignation, only to be met with a thin smile from the HR director. "Ms. Walsh, your internship is terminated effective immediately." Sienna blinked. "What? On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you disrupted operations, spread defamatory comments about staff, and interfered with intellectual property matters far beyond your role. Your access badge is revoked." Sienna's face twisted, first with shock, then fury. "This is political. You're all scapegoating me because of my mother." The HR director didn't flinch. "No. We're removing you because you don't belong here." The words stung more than she expected. Moments later, security escorted her out through the lobby. Reporters camped outside swarmed her instantly. "Miss Walsh." Did you know Jordan Banks owned the patents? Were you involved in trying to take credit? Are you responsible for the collapse? Cameras flashed. Microphones pressed forward. Sienna shoved past them, face burning red, as rain began to fall again. Her perfect world had shattered in 24 hours. The market bleeds. Meanwhile, Zephyrstone's stock continued its freefall. By the end of the trading day, shares were down 42%. Millions wiped away in hours. Major clients canceled contracts outright. Government agencies froze negotiations. Rival firms circled like vultures. On Wall Street, analysts dissected the collapse in real time. A classic failure of leadership. Over-reliance on untransferred IP. Arrogance at the top, negligence at the core. The financial press didn't spare them. Forbes called it the fastest tech fall since Theranos. Jordan watches from afar. In his apartment, Jordan sat quietly on the couch, the glow of the TV flickering against his face. CNBC replayed the launch disaster, cutting between Margaret's frozen expression and the line of text that had burned across the giant screen. Patent holder, Jordan Banks. The anchor's voice narrated. Zephyrstone's highly anticipated launch ended in chaos yesterday as their own engineer disabled the system. Sources confirmed that Jordan Banks, a 27-year-old with 6 pending patents, has retained legal ownership of the company's core security framework. Jordan muted the TV and leaned back. No cheers. No gloating. Just silence. 4 years, he had been invisible inside Zephyrstone, buried under deadlines, dismissed as a boy playing at work. Now, his name was everywhere. And he hadn't even lifted his voice. Only his code. The ghost in the machine. That night, Zephyrstone Tower was eerily dark. The building that had once radiated ambition now looked hollow, stripped of its confidence. Inside, a skeleton crew of engineers tried desperately to regain access, to salvage the broken framework. But every path they tried led back to the same message. Property of Jordan Banks. It wasn't vandalism. It was ownership, etched into the very DNA of the code. Margaret was gone. Sienna disgraced. The board in shambles. And yet Jordan hadn't destroyed the company completely. Not yet. He had simply pulled the mask away, forcing the world to see Zephyrstone for what it really was, hollow without him. 2 weeks after the launch catastrophe, Zephyrstone Tower no longer pulsed with life. Once a symbol of innovation, its glass walls now looked like a mausoleum. Inside, entire floors sat abandoned, engineers laid off, projects shelved, whiteboards still scrawled with half-finished diagrams. The cafeteria echoed with silence where hundreds once crowded for lunch. The empire had collapsed in record time. Investors flee. On the 14th day after the failed launch, Zephyrstone's stock closed at a mere $8.47 a share, a staggering drop from the $72 peak it had hit only a year prior. Investment calls were brutal. One hedge fund manager described the company as a sinking ship with no captain, no crew, and holes in the hull. By now, every major client had severed ties. Government contracts evaporated. Private corporations walked away. Competitors filled the void, offering stability where Zephyrstone could not. The brand was toxic. The board knew it. The market knew it. Which meant only one option remained. The fire sale. On a rainy Thursday morning, Zephyrstone's board gathered in the same sterile boardroom where Margaret Walsh had been dethroned. The chairman's voice carried no ceremony. We've received an acquisition offer from Typhon Systems, $320 million. The number landed heavy in the room. Once, Zephyrstone had been valued at over $2.1 billion. Now, they were being sold for scraps. Some board members protested. Others wept silently into their hands. But in the end, reality was inescapable. Typhon Systems acquired Zephyrstone the following week. The announcement made headlines for a day, but the tech world barely flinched. Zephyrstone had already been written off as dead. Margaret's silence. Margaret Walsh had disappeared from the public eye. Once hailed as a power executive, she was now the centerpiece of cautionary articles about arrogance and oversight. Harvard Business Review ran a profile titled, "The Cost of Ignoring Talent, the Walsh Case Study." Sources whispered she had retreated to a private villa in Napa, avoiding reporters and investors alike. The woman who once commanded entire engineering teams now existed as a cautionary tale whispered in MBA classrooms. Her daughter, Sienna, had returned to Stanford to finish her MBA. But even there, her name carried a stain. No internship would take her. Recruiters avoided her resume like a plague. The Walsh name had gone from aspirational to radioactive. Jordan's quiet ascent. While Zephyrstone crumbled, Jordan moved in silence. He didn't appear on television. He didn't give interviews. He didn't tweet victory laps. Instead, he sat in a co-working loft overlooking Puget Sound, sketching designs in notebooks, refining his framework, and meeting with venture capitalists who now sought him out. Thomas Garrett, his lawyer, had been right. The patents were his to wield, his to license, his to shape into the future he wanted. Within a month, Jordan had raised $12 million in seed funding from 3 major VC firms. The name of his company came to him easily. Iron Vault Security. A name that carried strength, permanence, unbreakable foundations. The competitors take note. The irony was rich. Within weeks of its founding, Iron Vault signed licensing agreements with 3 of Zephyrstone's largest former clients. Contracts that had once been secured under Margaret's watch now flowed directly to Jordan. The industry whispered. Reporters speculated. But Jordan remained mostly out of sight, focusing not on revenge, but on building. Yet everyone knew, Iron Vault's rise was Zephyrstone's epitaph. The lesson begins to take shape. At a dinner with his closest advisors, one of the VCs raised a glass. To Jordan Banks. The man who outplayed the system. Jordan shook his head slightly. I didn't outplay them. They dismissed me. They underestimated me. All I did was remind them that respect isn't optional. His voice was calm, not boastful. Almost reflective. The room fell quiet at that. Because everyone knew it was true. The shadow over Zephyrstone's legacy. In the months that followed, Typhon Systems quietly stripped Zephyrstone for parts. The once proud brand ceased to exist, absorbed into a corporate machine. Employees who had once sneered at Jordan now whispered his name with a mix of regret and awe. If only they'd treated him differently. If only Walsh hadn't been so blind. But the truth was set in stone. Zephyrstone's death wasn't just a market failure. It was a failure of respect, of leadership, of humility. The first office of Iron Vault Security wasn't glamorous. A renovated warehouse on the edge of Seattle's industrial district, with exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the faint hum of cargo trains in the distance. But the space crackled with energy, the kind that only comes from people building something new. Jordan didn't care about the lack of polish. For him, this was freedom. His company, his code, his rules. The founding team. Jordan hand-picked his first hires carefully. Not the flashy resumes, not the Ivy League names. He wanted people who understood struggle, who valued craft over titles. Engineers who stayed up until 3 a.m. debugging because they wanted to, not because a manager demanded it. One of them, Priya Menon, a security analyst who had quit Zephyrstone after the collapse, joined with barely any hesitation. You built the bones of that system, she told Jordan. I saw how they treated you. If you're leading this, I'm in. Others followed. Within 2 months, Iron Vault had a lean but lethal team of 10. The technology. What Jordan gave them wasn't just code, it was a fortress. Iron Vault's framework was more than security. It was adaptive, self-healing, able to detect and neutralize threats in real time without slowing performance. Competitors were still relying on reactive defenses. Jordan's system was proactive, alive. Tech reviewers would later describe it as the difference between a medieval wall and a modern air defense system. The first victory. Iron Vault's first major client was a government contractor that had once been one of Zephyrstone's crown jewels. Jordan walked into the negotiation room in a simple navy hoodie, flanked by Priya and Thomas Garrett. Across from him sat executives in tailored suits, skeptical at first glance. But when Jordan demoed the framework, showing how Iron Vault's system dismantled simulated attacks in seconds, the room shifted. Suits leaned forward. Notes were scribbled frantically. The contract was signed within a week. Multi-million-dollar licensing deal. Zephyrstone's ghost was officially buried. The industry reacts. Tech press exploded with headlines. Iron Vault Security lands major contracts in record time. Jordan Banks, from cast-off engineer to tech titan. The Walsh legacy, how hubris made a kingmaker. Investors who had once ignored Jordan now flooded his inbox with meeting requests. But Jordan wasn't chasing their validation. He wasn't building Iron Vault to prove the Walshes wrong. He was building it because he finally could, without interference, without arrogance clouding the vision. The lesson made public. At his first public keynote as CEO, standing before a crowd of 400 industry leaders, Jordan spoke simply. Respect and competence aren't negotiable. When you dismiss someone because of their age, their background, or because they don't look like your idea of a leader, you don't just insult them, you blind yourself. And when you're blind, you fail. That's what happened to Zephyrstone. That's what won't happen here. The crowd rose in applause. A symbolic moment. Later that night, back at Iron Vault's warehouse office, Jordan stood by the window, watching the city lights reflect off the sound. On his desk sat a small plaque gifted by his team. 3 words etched into brushed steel. Never underestimate. Jordan smiled faintly. Iron Vault wasn't just a company. It was a message, a fortress built not just of code, but of the lessons Zephyrstone had refused to learn. Months turned into a year. Iron Vault Security wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Their technology became the gold standard for cybersecurity contracts across finance, healthcare, and defense. Rivals scrambled to keep up, but Jordan's patents had built an iron wall around the industry. Where Zephyrstone had once dominated, Iron Vault now stood unchallenged. Zephyrstone's ghost. Meanwhile, the name Zephyrstone disappeared from the skyline. Typhon Systems dismantled the brand entirely, folding what scraps remained into their own infrastructure. To the public, Zephyrstone was little more than a cautionary tale, another giant brought down not by competitors, but by its own arrogance. In MBA case studies, professors summarized it simply, the Walsh effect. A warning against dismissing the very talent keeping your company alive. Margaret Walsh never returned to the tech scene. Sienna Walsh, despite attempts to rebrand herself, found doors closed at every turn. The empire they tried to build on borrowed power had turned to ash. Iron Vault ascends. Jordan, however, didn't chase revenge or headlines. He poured himself into building something lasting. He met with clients personally, listened to engineers at every level, and made it clear, no one at Iron Vault would ever be treated as disposable. The culture was sharp, disciplined, but also respectful. People stayed late not out of fear, but because they believed in the mission. Journalists began to call Jordan the reluctant titan. Unlike other CEOs, he rarely sought the spotlight. But when he did speak, people listened. The closing keynote. At the 2-year anniversary of Iron Vault, Jordan stood on stage at the company's first global conference. Thousands of engineers, executives, and partners filled the hall. He began not with numbers, but with a story. When I was 27, I sat in a conference room where people told me I didn't belong. That I was just a kid, wasting time on fantasy football while they were building an empire. They were wrong. And not just about me. The room was silent. They were wrong about what leadership means. Leadership isn't titles. It isn't arrogance. It isn't inherited. Leadership is respect. And when you forget that, when you underestimate the people who actually do the work, you've already lost. Zephyrstone forgot. Iron Vault will never forget. Thunderous applause erupted, echoing through the hall like a vow. Legacy etched in code. That night, after the conference, Jordan walked alone through Iron Vault's headquarters. In the server room, racks of humming machines cast a soft blue glow across his face. The framework he had written years ago, the one they tried to steal, the one they mocked, was now the beating heart of an empire. Etched into the initialization code, hidden like a signature only engineers would ever find, was a single line Jordan had left years ago. // respect is the foundation. A reminder of where it all began. A lesson that would outlive him. Zephyrstone's arrogance became a cautionary tale. Jordan Banks' resilience became a legend. And in the tech world, one truth rang louder than any headline. Respect and competence cannot be faked. Underestimate them, and you invite your own destruction.